Just a couple housekeeping rules for our virtual class today. If you wouldn't mind putting yourself on mute. We love babies, we love dogs, got them, but we can hear you if you're not on mute. So welcome, come on in. You can find the mute button if you're new to Zoom on the bottom bar. There's going to be a couple of icons. You want to find the microphone, you click on it on the side and put yourself on mute. Great. And also on the bottom, if you have a question for me, you can type it into the chat box.
You want to be on?
Go ahead, put yourself on mute. We're all getting together in here. Okay, great. My husband, Marley. Thank you, Marley. He's from Virginia. I'm down here in Daytona Beach, Florida, and he's moderating for us today. So if you have a question for me as we go along, that's what I'm here for. But rather than asking it, you can just type it into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and he'll ask it out loud for you when we have natural pauses, so we can take all the questions in batches, which will just keep the flow going. All right, we usually like to just do a little small talk here, first couple minutes, everybody just getting their coffee, getting their tea, joining. So we'll recap all that in just a moment. This morning we are making sourdough donuts, which I'm super excited about. I like to make them on Christmas morning, of course. Fat Tuesday is coming up. Mardi Grasses are also good for that, and they're actually just good every day. Doesn't matter. You don't need a special occasion. But these are the donuts. So we've got some made already, right? I was doing that with my daughter earlier, but these are the donuts that we'll be making today. I'll show you how to make the rings, which result naturally in the holes, which are great. Some whole donuts, which we're going to fill. And then, of course, I mentioned, if you follow me on Instagram, Baker Hands over there. So give me a follow if you're not already. But I mentioned on Instagram and in my newsletter, these apple fritters, which is actually what my mom used to make us growing up. We had to pick the apples, and then she would make us the apple fritters. So these are pre-made, obviously, and we're going to decorate them and fill them towards the end of class. I'm just going to pop them over here. Okay, great. We'll go over the housekeeping rules one more time. So welcome, good morning. If you have a question, type it into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Marley is our moderator, and he will ask those questions out loud for you when we have natural pauses. Also, if you have any questions in general about the Zoom, you need help with something, he's awesome at that. So you can type your tech questions into the bottom as well. And then you just want to have your mic on mute, and let's get started. So I thought I'd kick this off with just a couple tools that you might want to have. And I'm going to come over to the camera and just angle it down and angle it back up, but just so you can get a better view of what's going on here. You don't need a ton of special equipment to make a donut, but it is more involved than, say, a loaf of bread. So, of course, for consistency and precision, I always use a digital scale. So this particular brand is called a My Way. Nobody's paying me to say that, but these are the scales that I prefer to use. I like to have the plate lifted up away from the screen. That's just my personal preference. And these are what I use in all my in-person workshops as well. So you do want to have a digital scale. Everything is in grams. That's just going to help us with consistency and accuracy. You want some sort of spider or slotted spoon or strainer for frying the donuts. We've got our dry mix and our wet mix, and so you want a nice whisk rather than just a fork to whip up the eggs and the sourdough starter, the milk and the water. I like to have two different kinds of, I call this a bench knife, and I call this a dough scraper. They are interchangeable, but I like to cut the dough when we go to cut it and portion it out with something sharp. You can get these with a nice wooden handle as well. And then I call these a dough scraper. They're flexible, and this is great for getting the dough out of the mixing bowl, cleaning up your dough bowl, and just clean up in general. I don't have a favorite brand, but I do know a nice hack. If you go to the hardware store, you can find these pretty inexpensively in the paint aisle, like a paint scraper. So I've seen culinary students do that. I thought it was genius. Rolling pin. This is my grandmother, so it's got the roll here. I prefer a French style rolling pin, which is more of a dowel, but it's really nice to be in my parents' kitchen. So if you didn't catch that in the beginning, I'm in Daytona Beach of all places, but living with my parents for a couple months while our family's new house gets built outside of DC. So you want something to poke into the whole donut to get the filling in there. So I've got a straw that I just pulled here out of the cabinet, or just a skewer as well, so we can make an inroad to get the filling in there. You do want some kind of clip-on candy thermometer. It's going to help you get that oil to fry the donuts at 375 degrees. I like to use a digital thermometer to check the temperature of my dough when I'm done mixing. I don't go through the process of temping the milk and the water for this, because a lot of the hydration in this enriched dough comes from the egg. But I do like to take the temperature of the dough when I'm done mixing, just to get a good idea of where it's at. So these are really helpful, especially in your bread making. You want some sort of sifter. At the end, we're going to do some powdered sugar on the filled donut, so this is going to help with that. I found this and it's just awesome. It is my mom's donut cutter. And what I like about this is the middle pops out. And this is what I use to make the donut hole with in my shaped donuts. So I prefer to shape the individual donuts, weigh them out and shape them, rather than roll the dough out and cut it. Well, I'll show you a couple of different ways later. So this is just an old school donut cutter, and I'm simply just going to use the middle. And for my donut holes, I like something about this size. I used to say a shot glass, but it's actually just too big of a donut hole. So something about, it's like a little bit bigger than a screw top for like a wine bottle. I like to use something wide. It's just a pretty blue glass, but something like a pint glass size. I'll show you how to do the filled donut shape 2 different ways. And so when I do roll that out, you want something to punch it. And I just prefer like a larger donut because it's going to be filled. And you want a plastic bag or any kind of cloth bag or piping bag, really, doesn't matter the material. And then a wide tip that's open for piping your filling in. And I am going to use a mixer. You could do this by hand. I'm going to pop the camera up. But I prefer, just like with brioche dough, to mix any enriched dough in a mixer. So I've got my KitchenAid, and for your mixer, you want to have a paddle attachment. A lot of people just go right to the dough hook. Makes sense, right? It's called a dough hook. But one of the things I found when using the mixer is that the paddle attachment is actually going to whip or incorporate more air into your dough than a dough hook will. And we are using natural leavening, we're using sourdough to lift this very heavy dough, right? We've got eggs, sugar, butter, milk, heavy ingredients. And so we're asking the sourdough to do a lot. And one of the ways we can help get a nice rise in our dough is by just incorporating air through using a mixer, and then further incorporating air through using a paddle attachment. So that's what we're using here. And that's what I use for brioche and other enriched doughs when I do choose to use a mixer. You can do this by hand, just take some elbow grease and 4 stars, A+ if you're doing it by hand. Couple of other things. You want a large, heavy, I use a cast iron pot from Lodge or the Stop, the 5-quart that I'll be frying the donuts in. And the last kind of tool that I want to show you is a little bit unusual. Let me just get these off here. But it will help you maintain the correct temperature for your donuts. and that is a little homemade proof box. So even here in Florida, we're having a cold snap, which I grew up in Maine, so I'm trying not to laugh, but all the plants are covered out here. And so even here, when it's 50 degrees out, I still use a proof box for my donut dough or my brioche dough. And so what I have is just a cooler, and then a heating pad. I put the heating pad in. I'll mix the dough, pop it in here. So you want to, when you pull it out of the mixing bowl, you want to transfer it into something that's going to fit in whatever cooler you have. And then you can turn this on low, plug it in. I do prefer to keep it to the side. Otherwise, you can sort of cook the bottom of your dough as it's going. And then if it has a timer, you want to make sure that you're checking it so it doesn't shut off. And I keep my dough in here for the whole 8 hours of that bulk fermentation of that first rise. So the dough is going to rise twice, once after we mix it, and then once after it's shaped. So I've been using this every time I make donut dough, even in the warm climate here down in Florida, and it makes a perfect dough, nicely risen, and helps keep the temperature stable. A lot of times, even with bread dough, you'll get your dough at the right temperature coming out of the mixer, and then you have a chilly kitchen and the temperature drops. So this is a nice way to stabilize it without having to buy like a $200 proofing box or some expensive thing that they're trying to sell you on the internet. So just a cooler. Does anybody have any questions about the tools? Otherwise, we'll get into mixing the dough.
Yeah, we haven't had any questions come in through the chat. But yeah, just want to let you know there are 38 people that have joined. Here's one is, what do you think the ambient temp is in the cooler?
I think it's around like 78 degrees. Keep it on low. And like yesterday, the temperature jumped in here, but we had a warm day. So I actually just went over and shut it off and then just closed the lid again and then let it continue. I'll sometimes just take the temperature of the dough as it's in there. I don't really like the dough to get over 80 degrees because we do have a fair amount of butter in here. You don't want the butter to start leaching out of the dough or the dough to get too soft where it's going to interfere with building some nice structure. So I'm going to go with 78. So hopefully that answers your question. So I've got everything already weighed out, and I really like to encourage you. I call it the weigh out. If you're a cook, you call this your mise, but it's really important to great baking. No matter what you're making, could be a cracker, could be a cake, could be these donuts, but having everything weighed out the night before just helps you get your head in the game. You're going to read that whole recipe through. You're going to think about how you might structure your day or do something different with the dough so you can, maybe go grocery shopping or something. But having it all weighed out before you go to mix is really going to set you up for success. So in the bowl of the mixer here, I already have 100 grams of bread flour. I'm using Central Milling's High Mountain. It's a high gluten bread flour, great for bread, obviously, pizza, bagels, anything that you need a lot of protein for and that you want a lot of chew. So I've got 100 grams of that, and then I have 300 grams of King Arthur all-purpose flour. I like to say that a recipe is a living document, and so I know we have a lot of awesome bakers here on today's class, and so you can play around with those flour ratios. I started off with this recipe doing 50% bread flour and 50% all-purpose flour, and I got awesome, cool, big bubbles in my donuts, which I loved. And then I graduated to a more tender, sort of denser, kind of cakier crumb, still fried donut, not baked though. And so there's a little bit more all-purpose. So you can mess around with those ratios. I haven't done 100% bread flour. I think that'd probably just be way too chewy for my taste. And so I'd like to continue on with this recipe and do some whole grain, put in some rye. So that's just a note on the 2 flours that we're using, all-purpose and bread. We're blending them to get a nice tender consistency, but something that will still pop when we fry it. I've got 80 grams of sugar in here. I use granulated sugar. You could use caster sugar, just something finer so it dissolves into the dough better. And of course, I like to use unbleached sugar. And I've got 8 grams of salt. I like to use sea salt. That 8 grams isn't going to add a ton of minerality to the overall dough, but I just like sea salt. It's pink. I don't know. I'm simple, you guys. That's what I'm into. So I weigh out all the dry ingredients, and you're just going to stir it to combine that. Backtracking just a little bit, this amount of dough should give you around a dozen donuts, just to refresh there. And in this bowl here, I've got the wet ingredients. So you want room temperature eggs. So I take those out the night before. I've got 170 grams of egg. And sometimes, depending on the size of the egg, that's 3, that's it. Sometimes I need to add more. So if you need to add more egg, I prefer to just add the yolk and not the whole egg. So this is actually 3 whole eggs and 1 yolk to get 170 grams. And I've got 150 grams of my sourdough starter, which I hide everything on myself for these, but I'll find it in a minute. Oh, here it is. So this is my sourdough starter, and I feed it generally with the central milling high gluten bread flour. So it's nice and bubbly. When you go to mix your slurry, which is what I'm calling this combination of wet ingredients, you want your starter to smell fresh, floral, yogurty. You want it to have a bubbly surface. I say like dish soap size bubbles, and maybe even a little bit of a dome. And I like to feed it, I say 6 to 8 hours before I mix the dough. But if your kitchen is cool overnight, which is generally what I do when I'm up in Northern Virginia, or I'm all Southwestern Virginia, now Northern Virginia, living in several different places at once. But I like to feed it around 8:30, 9 o'clock. That's as late as I can stay up. And then I use it around 8 or 9 a.m. the next day. So obviously that's longer than 6 hours. But, on the younger side, on the floral side, if you wake up and, the heat kicked on, your starter has a dimple or a divot in it, it started to collapse. You can see it recede down the side of the jar or the container. Go ahead and just refresh it. You can probably use it within 3 or 4 hours after that. One thing you can do to test the strength of your starter is to put a little portion in a glass of water. And if it floats, you can feel free to use it. If it sinks, it's going to sink for one of 2 reasons. It's either not fermented enough and it needs to continue rising, or it's over fermented and you need to refresh it. You'll know if it's over fermented because you might even have a little separation of alcohol and starter. That's called the hooch. So the alcohol is just lighter than the flour and water mixture. It's going to separate out and rise to the top. So if it smells vinegary or pungent or acidic and you see a little bit of that hooch, just go ahead and refresh it. You want something nice and vibrant to go into your dough because, again, we're asking it to do some heavy lifting today. So that's my starter here. I did notice we ran out of the bread flour. I had to order some more, and so I was feeding it with the King Arthur all-purpose flour. It did a nice job of fermenting, but this is 38% the weight of the flour in the formula. So it is going to have a pretty big impact on the way your dough looks and the way the donuts rise. And then, of course, how much volume you get when you fry them if you swap out the flour. So for the donuts, I encourage you to use a strong bread flour to feed your starter with. The all-purpose is going to be fine. You get a cakier, kind of denser donut. It's not the end of the world, but it's a large part of the overall dough. So it has a big impact. Whereas, say, some of my bread doughs, I'll go down to 10% starter, and it doesn't really matter that much with this dough. It's such a large portion. So 170 grams of egg, some combination of egg, 150 grams of the sourdough starter, and then I use a little combination milk and water. I do like to heat those up in the microwave, or you can do it on the stovetop. but it's 40 grams whole milk, organic, and 40 grams water. And I just mix those together, warm them up, put them in here, and then this is separated a little bit, so I am gonna whisk it. And this is the slurry. And then I've got out 113 grams or 1 stick of butter. I like to use Plugra or Kerrygold for this. And when you use nice eggs, especially if you get something farm fresh, it's awesome. We're doing all organic here today, but you notice a gorgeous yellow golden color to your dough. So if you can grab something from the farmer's markets, those gorgeous orange centers of the eggs, those yolks, and then a really nice high quality butter. This has 82% butter fat. It's also going to lend some beautiful color and just nice lusciousness. The more butter fat, the silkier your dough is going to be. So it's very enticing. So just stirring to combine. I'm going to pour this in. I'll see if I can get the camera just angled a little bit more into the bowl. And just go real slow. I'm going to turn it up to 4 for just a minute here. You have to hold it down. All right, I'll turn it off and pull this up so you can see what it looks like. So glutinous, golden, sticky. And what I like to do now is just make sure that there's nothing on the very bottom. So my flexible spatula is what I prefer to use on the bowl. So I like to scrape down the paddle attachment, make sure there's no clumps of dry flour there. Scrape down the bowl, and just check underneath on the bottom. There's always like a dime size amount of flour that doesn't get incorporated, which I worked for a wonderful baker who could tell from across the room if there was like a dollop of unincorporated flour under a 300-pound batch of dough. So now I have the same meticulousness. Okay. So it's quite shaggy, right? It doesn't really look like a dough yet. It's normal. Okay, get it on there. Now I'm going to turn it up to 4. The recipe calls for 3 minutes of this mixing. I'm going to speed it up, and I'm also just going to show you that, again, the recipe is a living document, so you can kind of fudge it how you need to. We're going to go through this process rather quickly, so you don't have to wait while we just watch the mixer for 3 or 4 minutes. So bring it up to 4. And then while it's mixing, I'm going to start to put in the butter in these like tablespoon chunks at a time. And you want to let it fully incorporate until you don't see any difference in the color, and then just keep adding. It smells so good already. I've learned to do this quickly because my daughter now will run into the kitchen anytime she hears the mixer on, and she either wants to eat the raw dough or just a massive chunk of butter. So I've started to speed things up since I have a child. I know in your recipe it says to wait 5 minutes. So if that's what you're doing, that's what you should do. that's gonna make the best dough. It'll just help develop the gluten before you add something heavy in. So starting to form a clump around the paddle, and eventually it's just going to climb its way up the paddle. So I'm going to shut it off. So give you a peek at what the dough looks like now. Almost like a cake batter. A little thicker, a lot thicker, but really nice. Adding that butter, it just gets this gorgeous shine and silkiness to it. I'll show you what it looks like here. This is my grandmother's mixer, and it does get quite hot even just doing this. So if you're working with an older model, you can give it some breaks as well. It's going to help your dough anytime you can rest it. So pretty shaggy. And you might be like, oh, is this going to turn into anything? And it will. Just give it time, just like the rest of us do this. Okay. I'm going to mix it one more time and then take it out of the bowl. So I have waiting just a dough bowl with just a light coating of grease. And again, the paddle attachment, I can get it on here, just helps incorporate more air into the batter. So I always thought, with sourdough, right, there's 100 parts of lactobacilli or bacteria to 1 part wild yeast. So there's a lot less yeast in a sourdough starter than, say, a commercial packet of yeast. And so that's why we're using the sourdough starter, because we're getting all the culturing benefits of the lactobacilli in our dough, whether it's a donut or a loaf of bread. I mean, it's a donut. I'm not making this for, healthy reasons, but it's still there. And so, health benefits aside, that bacteria is going to transform the flour, make it easier on your digestive system. It's giving us tons of flavor. So we need a lot of time for this dough, and we need to bring in some air other than just the air that the yeast is going to output into the dough. So whipping some air into the doughish batter here with the paddle attachment, the yeast is going to generate gas, and it's going to hit an air pocket that's already there and just help give you a nice expansive dough. So if you use a mixer to mix your bread dough, try using the paddle attachment. It works with a highly hydrated dough, not something stiff, but you might get a little bit better rise because there's more air to start with. Okay. Let's give it a few more turns. Okay. And we're going to call this good. So it didn't totally pull away from the side of the bowl. But if you go long enough, the gluten's going to develop. It's going to pull itself together. It's going to pull around the paddle and climb up the paddle. And that's how you know that you are nearing the end. I'm going to transfer this into a bowl. I've got that one. And I'll go ahead and spray it. Historically, I've lived in, small mountain towns down here in Daytona Beach. I'm like wearing new clothes, using new things. I don't know, live and learn. It's fun. At home, I would generally probably just put a little olive oil in this, but my mom's teaching me all kinds of new things, like how to live in 2022. Okay, so we get this out. And this is what it looks like here. Okay, got my bowl. And this is where your flexible spatula is really, or your flexible dough scraper is really going to come in handy. I am working on my next book out by Potter on August 30th of this year. We're going through the second pass, which is part of why I'm down here living with my parents. And childcare is amazing. And we went through a big conversation in the book, you know, is this a bench knife dough scraper? So, you know, now I'm just always going to call these a dough scraper. So I just get it together in the bowl a little bit. And then just right it. Get as much as you can. And I'll go ahead and take the temperature of this for those of you that are curious. And if there are any questions, this is a great time. Do we have any questions?
We sure do. We've got a couple right now. So the first is going back to the starter, would using the starter in that floral younger state lead to less sour tasting dough? What can you adjust if you're trying for a more sourdough taste?
Oh, it's a great question. So a lot of times, I could just we could talk about this for days, but you don't want more starter. You've already got 38% starter to 100% the weight of the flour. So there's a large portion of starter in this dough already. And what you want to do is give the dough more time after you've made it. That's what's going to increase the tang. Same for your bread dough. If you're looking for like a sourdough kick to your bread, cold temperatures, so using the fridge, and long fermentation times, so like 72 hours, which is what we're going to do with these donuts, is how you're going to pull out that like zippy sourdough flavor. So hopefully that answered your question. But using the fridge, like how we're going to do, is really going to help you. And you can get that, you know, in the, this is a tangent here, but you can get that strong sourdough flavor that a lot of people find really exciting, myself included, in the summer, even with just a small amount of culture or sourdough. So in the summer, I might put, you know, 10% sourdough to the weight of the flour in my bread dough, but then use the refrigerator and actually just ferment it in the fridge for 48 hours before I shape the dough and then proof it and then bake it. And that's what's going to extract that strong flavor for you. More questions?
Yeah, there's one more right now. And it's, if you were attempting this recipe by hand mixing, are there any indicators that you would look for that would tell you that the mix was successful or not?
You just uniformity. So you just want to make sure that all the ingredients are homogenized. And so you can do it by hand. You know, I didn't have a mixer for years. My first book of Bakers Here was literally just written with my bare hands and a whisk. There's cakes and doughs and everything in there. So I love that if you're doing it by hand. But one thing I would encourage you is to do this motion. So you're squeezing, and I'll actually just show you in this. So if you're mixing it by hand, one thing you can do is just hold it on one end and just squeeze it like, I like to joke, like you're grabbing the wrist of somebody, you know, you want to get their attention. You're just squeezing with all your might. And this is going to pinch the ingredients together. One of the things I find, and this is not to make fun of anybody, but teaching bread baking for a living, I see a lot of hands in dough. And most people are just kind of giving their dough a massage. And your dough doesn't need a massage. Maybe you do, but the dough needs to be incorporated and homogenized. And so actually this motion of cutting and clipping through the dough from one edge of the bowl to the other, this is how I incorporate the salt into my bread dough if I've done something like an autolyse. This pinching motion is going to give you way better results than any sort of like spooning or holding that you might, you know, want to do with your dough. The other thing you can do with your hand, I always, if I'm mixing by hand, kind of keep a pitcher of water in my area. I'm always dipping my hand in water it's gonna add, very little water to the dough. I don't worry about that. But I'll take the dough and then actually just squeeze it straight through your fingers like you're extruding pasta. Just get it through your hands. And it's the squeezing and the pinching that's going to help it all come together. And then you're kind of doing the same thing. You're incorporating air into the dough. And then this just feels really good. You're also cutting the gluten strands so that they can reform, which will give you a stronger dough than if you're just sort of patting it all together. So give yourself a pat on the back, but the dough doesn't really need it. This just feels really good. All right, sorry.
One more question here.
I don't have a lot of alone time. I'm living with my parents right now, you guys. I'm my toddler. So, okay, what do we got?
Just wondering about the ideal refreshing process in the beginning. Is there an ideal amount of flour and water to feed in order to get the best healthy starter to use? Is it just what I'm normally feeding my active starter?
I do, sorry, let me just get this water off. I do about 80% water to 100% flour. So it's not total 50-50. I've started to like my starters just a tiny bit on the stiffer side. They hold for longer. So if I get, busy or I can't get right to them, I know that the recipe calls for equal, when you refresh your starter, you're going to discard the majority of it, leave about 25% in the container, and then feed that equal parts or 100 parts flour to 100 parts water. I use lukewarm water, so maybe like 68-degree water. I like to add the water first, stir it up, so kind of make a slurry, then add the flour and stir it that way. But yeah, for me personally, I'm right now, like what I fed this starter overnight to get the doughs going for this workshop was about 80% water, just a little bit stiffer, which is also going to help, make this dough just a little firmer. As you can see, it's already pretty like billowy and luscious to begin with. Hopefully that was helpful. Okay, cool. So your starter's been refreshed, your dough's mixed in the morning, and then this is going to go through an 8-hour bulk fermentation or first rise. We've got first rise, shape it, second rise. So I'm going to stick this to the side, and we've got a dough ready to fold. So we are not doing a ton of folds on our dough. So if you've taken a bread workshop with me or you make bread at home, it's awesome. And a lot of times I'll encourage people with their sourdough bread to do a lot of folding because we're mixing it by hand. The folding is really where we develop a lot of the structure and the strength in our bread dough. Not so for this because we use the mixer and we basically fully incorporated it and strengthened it in the bowl. We just need to give it 3 folds over an 8-hour span. So I'll show you how to do a fold. So this dough I mixed about an hour ago. Just bring it over here so you can see. One of the things I like to do to check the strength of the dough is called pulling a window. Super fun. You want a golf ball size piece of your dough. So this has just been sitting in the bowl for an hour. I haven't touched it, and just letting the dough rest. You can see there's so much strength in here. So my fingers are a little moist, and then I just stretch it like pretend you're making like a little pizza for an elf. And this is checking the strength of the dough. So I like to do this with most of my doughs. It's called the window pane test. The lighting in here is not totally helpful, but yeah, if we do it like that, you can kind of see. You want to get it paper thin, and if you hold it up to a window, you can actually see right through it, and you can actually see the strands of gluten in there. And you want to get it paper thin. So this is totally like one of those slime channels, but You can see the properties of gluten here. It's extensible and it's elastic. So that's what we get with nice bread flour. So I've got a little tear there. That's fine. I've gotten this basically as thin as possible. So this dough is going to hold together. It's going to be great. If you mix your donut dough by hand, or you're using some of this information to make sourdough bread, not a donut, and you go to pull your window before the first fold. That's when I like to do it, after the dough's been resting before the first fold. And it starts shredding. Give your dough a little bit more time, increase the folds, and then potentially refrigerate it overnight. That overnight refrigeration will build up a little acidity in the dough, which is going to help strengthen those gluten networks to a point. So those are some tips if your dough is shredding apart, which might happen if you're using freshly milled flour, say from a stone ground flour mill, regional flours. Your friend's a farmer, they dropped off a bag of grain, you made some flour in your kitchen. Those kinds of flours, which are awesome, they might shred a little bit more. So it's nice to check the strength with those. We've got some pretty foolproof flours here today. So to do a fold, I like to wet the surface of the table a little bit. So just a tiny bit of water and a little bit of water on your hand. And if you can, right? So firm, decisive motion, just turn it out onto the table, one fell swoop. And I'm going to kind of get it into a rectangle, and I'm going to take the part closest to my body and I'm going to flip it away towards you. And this is how my hands go when I'm doing this. So if you're imagining it, half of it is going to stick to the table, half of it I'm going to pull it towards me. So we're strengthening the gluten, stretching it, and then flip it towards you. So lift it up, pull it, flip it. And then I'm going to take from the side this part that's the top. I'm going to rotate my body, stick it to the table, do the same thing. I'm going to do it 3 times, and it should pull into a ball. So we'll just go for it. Picking it up from the right-hand side, pulling it all off the table, rotating it, sticking it, flipping it away. And what I start to do now, rather than just have my hands open, I kind of flick it under. And so I'm tucking the swath of dough that's going towards the camera gets tucked under. And that is just this tiny little thing that pulls it all together. So we'll do it a couple more times. Picking it up from my right-hand side, the top touches the table. I'm gonna flip it towards you, and then just that little turning it under itself as it goes. Oh, here, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay, pick it up, slap it down, and here you get a nice ball of dough. So it's all tucked into itself, and then you transfer it back to the bowl and give it an hour. Cover it, dinner plate, sheet pan, whatever you got, cover it, give it an hour rest. When you come back to fold it, you want to see that it's sloped on the sides, that you can press it and it's not tight on the top. And you'll do 3 of these folds an hour apart. And let me fold the other dough that I just made so you can see it. I'm sorry, I didn't realize where the camera was. Let me just grab that real quick so you can see how it tucks under itself. So a little bit of water. And then I will turn on the oil so we can start frying. Okay, then flip it away from me. This is fresh out of the mixer, so it's a little bit harder. But I just wanted you to see that I'm tucking it underneath like that. And I'm going to grab my bench knife. We'll get this in. So if you are mixing your dough by hand, again, You can increase your folds to gather more strength in the dough. And then if you find that process of folding really hard, you can also, this bench knife will be helpful to you as you go, and you can wrangle it with the bench knife. Do we have any questions on folding?
There's nothing in the chat right now.
Great, great. Hopefully everybody is still awake. So I've got some dough that I made yesterday, and it's been in the fridge. What you're looking for. So again, you're gonna mix the dough. Well, let's go over. You've got options with this dough.
Here's a quick question about the fold.
Yeah.
Do you ever fold in the bowl or really prefer to do it on the table?
For years, I just folded in the bowl, but I find that it is superior to do it on the table. I didn't love the phrase slap and fold. I was like, I want to be gentle with my dough. That's just like not for me. But folding it on the table, I think strengthens the gluten much better. So that's always how I do it now. It just does. You get way more extension from here to here and a big flip under than you do just turning it in the bowl. If you're using 100% high gluten bread flour, it's not as important, but I love to blend flours and especially use stone ground regional flours. So they need a lot more structure built in by the baker because it's not in the flour. So I do those on the table. 3 ways you can handle the overall process for this dough. So you've mixed it, you've given it your 3 folds, you're at the 8-hour mark, and hopefully it looks like this. So it's risen about 40%. It doesn't totally double, but I see bubbles on the surface of the dough. When I press it, it totally feels like a pillow. And you can now turn it out onto the table and shape your donuts and potentially fry them then, although you don't get much flavor, and I prefer to let them proof a second time. So what I like to do, put the dough in the fridge, take it out the following morning, shape them, put the shaped donuts into pizza boxes. So I didn't point this out in the equipment earlier, but here it is. These are called pizza dough boxes. They fit really easily in all kinds of refrigerators. They're insulated. They're really great. This is what I do for my bagels, for my pizza, for my donuts. And so I like to shape the dough, which I'll show you in a second. Pop them in these, leave these out, room temperature, somewhere between 68 and 72 degrees for another 8 hours. Put them in the fridge, and then wake up and fry the donuts on the 3rd morning. You could shape your donuts, put them in the proofer boxes or pizza boxes, and fry them at the end of that 8 hours. But I prefer to fry a cold donut. It holds its shape much better, and that is how you're going to pull out the most sourdough flavor in the dough. Is that 3-day window, and that's the same exact process that I do for my pizza to get just awesome loft and just like the perfect kind of sourdough flavor. If you don't have a pizza box to store your dough in while it's proofing, I'll use a sheet pan lined with parchment, oil it lightly with like a extra virgin olive oil, and then maybe you've got like a cake pan, like a sheet cake pan you could invert over it. Or a kitchen towel. You want to sprinkle the top of the donuts with some flour so the towel doesn't stick, and nothing terry cloth. So like a flour sack towel or some canvas or like a apron like this over the donuts. But I get these online from Webstaurant, and it's a great commercial grade restaurant and bakery equipment, but they'll deliver to like a residential address, and you don't have to have freight or anything like that. So pizza boxes, but you've got options. So if 3 days is too long to wait for a donut, you could mix the dough, bulk ferment to 8 hours, shape them, proof them a little bit, fry them that day. You don't get the most rise or the most flavor, but you get them in 24 hours. You can refrigerate the dough overnight, shape them, fry them the following day. But I like to just have it ready to go in the morning. I got the oil going, I got my coffee in my hand, I'm making donuts. It's a good day. So I'm going to turn the oil on, turn the burner on, excuse me. And you want the oil to be at 375 degrees for the donuts. And then while that's heating up, I'll show you how to shape.
Would now be an okay time for a question?
Yeah, great.
How long have you pushed the fermentation? How many days have you left it in the fridge before frying? Yeah, what's the kind of longest?
3 days. Although I do encourage, especially if you haven't baked in a professional environment before, I encourage people to, with your bread dough, with anything, just push the proof. I think you're at a disservice if you're at home baking alone, because you don't have anything to compare it to. And one of the things I take away from my experience working in bakeries for other people for almost a decade was just how far you can really push the proof. And so when you see all those, big open crumbs on Instagram and everywhere, that is a fully proofed loaf of bread. So this has a lot of all-purpose flour in it. So I think I imagine it will start to deteriorate after 3 days. But now I'm inspired to try it for 4 days and see what it's like. At some point, there'll be enough built up acidity in the dough where, that acidity is going to strengthen the gluten. But once it gets out of balance, it's actually going to start to eat away at the gluten and become stringy and tough and really not great. Although I encourage you to always finish what you started. I made some cinnamon rolls, which some of you may have seen, or maybe taking the cinnamon roll class, but that was a case of, a little tangent here, but I knew I needed this dough to be perfect for class, but I love to experiment. So I started another dough at the same time that was just like whatever I wanted to put in the bowl. So if you're like me, that's a little hack you can do to get a perfect dough and then have your experiment. It turned into the best thing ever. And there were so many points where I was like, oh, this is just not gonna work. But of course, my mom wasn't gonna allow me to throw the dough away. So she's like, honey, there's a whole stick of butter in that dough. So we made it and we were crying over how good the cinnamon rolls were. They really were honestly that good. She was like, this is the best thing you've ever made. So finish what you start, and have some trust in the process and proof your dough. Getting back to proofing here. For as long as you think the dough can handle it. So if you start to see it deflate or shrivel, bake it. But I don't know, maybe 4 days would make a great donut. You try it and send me an email. But
and then one more just about the pizza boxes. Could you use covered Tupperware, or do you recommend those pizza boxes specifically?
Covered Tupperware is fine, but I do encourage you to invest in these pizza boxes if you're going to be doing bagels, pizza, donuts somewhat often. They'll pay for themselves in the great results that you get because the walls are very thick. So if it's a thick container, sure. I guess you could also use a cooler if you've got a big enough cooler. I don't know how big this is, but a large rectangular square one with a flat top that flips up like a tailgating. You could put your whole sheet pan in there and proof your donuts that way, but eventually they're going to have to go into the fridge. And so it's nice to have that cover, and then you can stack these in the fridge and they don't take up that much room, even with just a regular home fridge. So that's nice. But You can always use whatever you have on hand, and you'll find out if it works. So I'm just getting a little dusting flour out. You want to use as little flour as possible. So I like to do this two ways. I actually prefer for the ring donuts to shape them, and I also don't like to have excess dough. So I shape, I get out my digital scale and I portion and shape like you would a dinner roll, the dough for my ring donuts. But then I've sort of been on a journey with the dough for the filled donuts. Sometimes when they're shaped, and I'll fry them both ways for you today. Sometimes when I shape them, they're too much of they look like a baseball to me. And I kind of want a flatter donut for the filled ones, just aesthetically. And so I actually like to cut my dough in half. Can everybody, can you see the dough? Yeah. And I'm going to do half rolled out for the filled dough and half I'm going to shape. And I'm going to go ahead and eyeball it just to speed up the process for y'all here. Get my thermometer in the oil real quick. Just excuse me. Gotta find it. Okay, great. So you'll have your digital scale.
Is
flour.
Is this dough cold right now?
Yes. Yep. So this is made yesterday, 3 folds. Let it bulk ferment 8 hours. You're gonna see it rise 40% in the bowl. Stick it in the fridge, and then it can hang out in the fridge for about 24 hours. But I just wake up and shape them while I'm having my coffee. So I like them to be about 80 grams. That makes a donut that's, this size, which I think is pretty good. I'm learning how to scale down. I realized I like to make everything just like giant size. Like the first croissants I made were like, you had to have both hands. And so I like to make them on the smaller size, then I can eat a few and enjoy a couple different kinds of donuts. So Mary, I don't know if you're watching, but trying to curb my big and bready tendencies over here. So made enough donuts. I don't need to pull out the scale. And if you feel bothered by the scale, you can also just eyeball it. You can even make a little grid on the top of your dough, but they're about this big. It's about 1 inch by 1 inch. And then to shape them, this is also how I do my pizza. You've got one side that's perhaps a little bit floury, and I'm going to take it and make what I call like a little purse. So you're just shaping it and getting those ends to sort of kiss, if you will, like a dumpling. And then I take this end, put it onto the table, and then with your hand in a C shape, you're gonna cuddle it, sort of cup it in your hand, and then using a circular motion, you're just letting it stick to the table a little bit. And then the final thing is just a little drag of the hand to get a dough ball. So again, the floury side is the outside that's going to become the top. You've got a sticky portion here. You want to leave flour out of it. I'm going to stretch it to meet itself like a little dumpling or a purse. Put that seam down. My hand is in a C shape. I'm going to cuddle it or cup it. And then the last thing is just a little slide down the table. and that takes just a little bit of practice. You can also simply turn it over onto the table and, you know, naturally using your hands, you'll get that seam. I worked in a bakery once, Red Hen Baking in Middlesex, Vermont, and we made a lot of bread for restaurants and thousands of rolls a day. So if it takes a little practice, that's normal. Okay, that's one. Okay. And I'm gonna grab a sheet pan to put these on. I'll just transfer them later onto some parchment, that's fine. I know we have some folks tuning in or who are gonna watch this later that are in a commercial or a production setting. So this is a little bit geared towards the home baker, which is what I am now. But there's certainly ways you can modify it for a better experience in a professional setting. I really come to love the pleasure of baking at home. It's really rewarding and relaxing. And no matter how many magazines or awards, you know, when my daughter eats my bread and goes, it's like, that is the stuff of life. So I've got a rolling pin and I'm just gonna start in the center. You don't want to totally degas it, and you're going for about a ½ inch. You don't want to roll it too thin or you're going to end up with a flatter donut. So this is about the thickness that we're going for here. Okay. And then sure. These are going to be filled. Oh, there it is. These are going to be filled, so I want something kind of big. And what this is going to leave us with is some chunks or some excess, which will turn into fritters. So the scaled donuts, which I shaped in sort of like a dinner roll style, those are going to become rings with a hole, and these are going to become the filled donuts. Although if you prefer this process, rolling it out for whatever reason, you can make your ring donuts this way as well. So I've got some extra scrap. These will just get transferred onto the sheet pan as is. We're gonna have so many donuts tomorrow. It's like started a little neighborhood bakery down here. Every day my dad brings baked goods in little containers to all of his friends down the street. So, but my mom's also a great baker, and so, you know, we've been fighting over kitchen space. It's like as soon as I'm done a cake, she's in here making cookies, and then I'm in here making the donuts, and then she's making banana bread. So it's quite fun. So I've got a bunch of odd shapes, just cut it up. And then I like to put apples in. So the apples are going to be watery. And when you put it into the hot oil, it's going to sputter a little bit. So I like to chop up the apples into tiny cubes. And then a little bit of sugar in here, a little bit of cinnamon, and then let it set so they can macerate. And then the water will get pulled out so you don't have as much splatter when you go to do it. So I've got the cubed apples, and then to make the fritters, I get a couple pieces of dough, the apples, and I just press them in. This is like rewarding. Just press them in, and then just squeeze it all together. And then it'll puff up and have interesting shape the next day. So it's sort of like just a little doughy dumpling you got going on.
Terry, here's a quick question, but why is it better to shape than to cut the ring shape?
So I like to shape them all if preferred because I don't like excess. So when you scale each donut out to 80 grams, which is what I like, or I think maybe the recipe says 70 grams, you don't end up with little portions like this. So it's just a way to curb waste. But you know, I've been personally toying around with what shape I like best for the filled donuts. And when you shape them into a round, you kind of get like a ball when you fry them rather than like a commercial bakery style sort of flatter donut that's filled. So I found that rolling them out for the filled donuts gives me a flatter, and I can show you in just a second donut to work with. If that makes sense. So hopefully that answered your question. And I can fry them for you both ways so you can see the shaped and the cut donut. But cutting it just gives you, it's just hard to get no scrap when you cut. So scaling gives you no excess. But you know, the excess then can make the fritters. So the personal choice.
Do the apples,
Yep, go ahead.
do the apples slow the final proof?
Not by much. I'll show you the proof donuts. They're flatter, but I wouldn't say it slows it. Just they don't rise as much.
For the apple fritters, how much sugar and cinnamon do you add to the apple?
So I use one whole apple. I'm really into the Cosmic Crisps right now. I know they're like new and kind of trendy, but they're delicious. So for one whole Cosmic Crisp, those are kind of large, probably like 2 tablespoons sugar and a teaspoon cinnamon. Yep. Okay. But yeah. Oh, I need this to cut the hole. Okay, great. So the oil is at 360. Got a little bit longer to go here. So let me clean this up, and I'm gonna bring the oil right here so you can see. So these donuts were shaped yesterday, proofed for 8 hours at room temp, so 68, 72 degrees here, and popped in the fridge overnight. They're cold. I'm gonna fry them from a cold start, and they went from, it's gonna get all over my hand, but we'll try and show you the difference. They went from a size like this to a size like this. So, you know, I find myself in a lot of books say, you know, wait till it doubles in size. It's not a true doubling. Maybe a 30-35% rise from the original state. You can't do it now because they're cold, but you can do the same thing on the donuts that you would do for, say, brioche or any kind of sourdough bread, which is the poke test. So shaped them, put them in the boxes, let them go for 8 hours yesterday. I came home before dinner and took the lid off and sprinkle a little bit of flour on the top of the donut, and you just quickly jab it, and you want to see the indent of your finger, and then you want it to slowly rise back to meet you, and that's when you're in the zone. You could I could have chosen to fry them then, But again, I like to do it in the morning and I pull out more flavor by refrigerating them yet again for another night. And so popped them in the fridge. If you poke them and they're still feel dense and tight and it just springs right back to meet you, just like a bread dough, they're not ready. You want to give it more time, but generally don't go over 8 hours. If it's really warm where you are, say you like got them next to the wood stove or you're in Hawaii, I don't know, you want to watch the proof because they don't need to stay out for that whole 8 hours. They just need to stay out till they're fully proof. So that poke test is going to give you an indication of when they are ready. So it could happen, they could proof in 4 to 5 hours. Doesn't have to be that full 8. And generally, I don't let them go longer than 8 just because we do have egg and butter in here and they'll continue proofing in the fridge. So that's that. And then these are the fritters and the cut donuts here. So shaped and cut. So this is now when I hook the holes to make the rounds. So I've got oil is ready. I've got my little cutter here. I'm going to dip it in some flour and then I just cut them right in here. You want definitely something sharp so you're not, wrangling the donut and then you get your donut hole. And as I'm cutting it, I can see right there, like filling out with air. And sometimes I get on these donuts, what we call leoparding, like you would on a pizza, just those, the crust is, the outside is filled with tiny crystalline little air pockets. If you're worried that you have underproofed your dough for whatever reason, you can bring your donuts out and let them proof a little bit more at room temperature. But these look great. They feel like pillows. So that is good. So I'll leave, I'll show you what it looks like for the filled donuts, shaped by hand or cut. I did try to shape the ring donuts by hand, like how you would like a bagel, like I made a rope and put it around my hand and shaped it that way. It didn't really work great with this dough. I know that some bakeries do it. And if you're going to do that, I would increase your bread flour and decrease the all-purpose flour. It just, I didn't enjoy the process or the results. So that's just me.
See, there's a quick couple of questions.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried other fruit for the fritters, or would it be too wet?
I haven't. I was trying to rack my brain. It's citrus season, and we've got strawberries in season here. Neither of those were fitting, I thought, for what we're doing today, but I haven't, to be totally honest, but I don't know. Does anybody have any suggestions for something else that could go in a fritter? I thought maybe like some sort of squash, like a butternut squash. I thought could potentially be good. Okay, so I'm gonna take just put the thermometer to the side. When you attach it, you want to make sure that it's not touching the bottom. And you want it around 375, and then you want to have a wire rack ready to put the fried donuts on. Just 1 second. Just going to transfer these. Yeah, you do this enough and it just becomes like second nature. You're just buzzing around your kitchen. You got donuts everywhere. And it's just really enjoyable. Okay, so I'm gonna start to put them in.
Would now be okay for a question?
Yeah, great.
Do you ever proof them to a certain point at room temperature and then throw them in the fridge or freezer to stiffen them before frying? Do you ever fry from the fridge cold though?
Yes, and that's what I recommend. So I don't like to fry room temperature dough. So even if I was going to shape the donuts and fry them again, like say I'm going to do it that evening for some reason, I will put them in the fridge and let them firm up rather than putting them in at room temperature. I just find it a little bit easier. They don't stick to stuff.
And do you have recommendations for if you have a commercial proofer, recommendations for proofing stages to potentially speed up the proof from the 8 hours?
I would say just, gosh, I haven't used a commercial proofer in a long time, so I want to come to your thought. Just make sure that they pass the poke test. If you can keep it a nice constant, like 78 degrees. A little humidity is nice, but I know it'll go faster for you than 8 hours, but I don't know exactly. So it doesn't take that long, and I hope no one gets motion sickness, but I just want to show you. Learning together here, folks. So they are going to get some air bubbles, and I like a darker fry, but I'm just going to go ahead and flip these so you can see. And you can see those bubbles have started to happen, but for me gosh, I'm really sorry. Let's see. For me at 375, they take about 2 to 3 minutes. Of course, with this first batch, the temperature is going to drop immediately because I'm putting something cold in here. So the temperature will start to regulate once we get going here. I'm sorry if I didn't fully answer your question. I just it's been a hot minute since I've had a commercial proofer.
Got some good recommendations for other fruits in the fritters.
Awesome. What do we got?
Peach, potentially pear, sour cherry, peaches and berries.
Yes. I mean, what I love about donuts, the same thing with pizza dough, they are just this perfect blank canvas. So I've been really focused on the dough and getting like what I think is the best donut dough. And then there's like a whole world of what to do with the donut, once it's fried. So it's just an endless journey of delicious flavor, and like it's super fun.
Along those lines, there's a question about filling ideas or glazes.
So I've got over here a couple things to show you. I like to keep it super simple, but we'll do a quick glaze and some filling. So, okay, this looks good to me. Try not to. Now I've been living with my mom for a month. Thank you, Mom. Her voice is just in my head. Don't want to let it drip hot oil all over her kitchen, but this is what I'm looking for in my donut. So got some nice bubbles, definitely some loft, a golden color. I have to refrain from over frying them. I'm just so used to loving to bake my bread dough really dark, but they don't need that long in here. And now I want sour cherries. I did like a grapefruit glaze with some toasted and crushed pistachios a couple weeks ago, and that was really great. Whatever is kind of around. So we do have a candied orange peel and some orange simple syrup. that I've been making, and so I'm using that as kind of my seasonal ingredient here. Okay, going in. So this is what we've got. It smells so good.
Along those lines, does your kitchen smell like fried dough all day afterward? How do you prevent that?
You know, it's actually not so bad, and I don't know if it's just, you know, when I Marley knows when I was doing it at home, yes, the whole house smelled like donuts for quite some time, but I think we've got a stronger HVAC system going on here in my parents' house, and so it really doesn't. It's not so bad, but I would like open the window when I was doing these at home, or have a fan on. If you've got a hood on your stove, you know, generally I've been doing this on the stove, but I wanted to at least attempt for you to be able to see into this pot, and so you can do it that way as well. All right. So now I'm going to put some in to be filled that are the shaped.
And you have a preferred oil that you're frying in?
We're just using a light veggie oil. I know that there are other kinds that you could use that might add some flavor and be great, but this is what I've got. One thing, if your dough, you know, it has warmed up a little bit since the class started here. If your dough is sticky, you can just turn it over so that the firmer, I'm just turning it over so that the firmer flour side is on the spider and not the sticky bottom side. And 4 donuts in the pan this size is about what I can get fried comfortably, you know, to where the temperature of the oil isn't dropping so much.
Do you save the oil for future frying? It seems like
I
a lot.
do. Thanks to my mom. And you know, I wouldn't have thought of that myself, but we've used the oil about 3 times in a row. So what you can see is that when you do it, I don't know, I don't want to I need my cameraman. What you can see when you do it from the shapes is that you get like a more of a like tennis ball kind of look to the donuts to be filled. And so I'll show you the other shape as well. Just the cut ones. And then sometimes they're really hard to get to stay. If it develops like a big air bubble, I like to keep that skewer around and actually just pop it, because if there's too much air on one side, they won't stay fried. They'll just flip themselves over. That makes sense. But really just such an enjoyable process.
Do you think it's better to constantly move and flip them for a more even fry, or do you ever leave them on one side for a certain amount of time and
I'm trying
then
to
flip?
think about what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
I'm probably just flipping them and touching them a bunch because I'm like nervous, but 1 minute, turn them over, another minute. And this seems to be it's getting a little hot actually, so I'm gonna turn it down. But let it fry, flip it, let it fry, you're done. Okay, so this is the more, so this is the whole donut that will fill, and it just has more of a ball shape to it than the other ones. Which the ones to be filled, when you put them on the rack, they will sort of flatten a little bit, just as they cool on the rack. but I'll show you the other ones. And so these donuts today were made with an all-purpose starter. So I'm getting a ton of rise, but again, I encourage you to use bread flour in your starter for these donuts, and they'll be super poofy. It's been fun to shop for flour in Daytona Beach. It's like a whole different world than, say, Asheville, North Carolina. Okay.
Why do you cut the centers out post cold proof instead of before?
It's so much easier with a cold dough, like hands down, 100% easier to handle the dough and touch it. This dough is really sticky and tacky, so if you try and cut it while it's warm, you'll just like it's a mess. You don't want to do it. So hopefully that answered your question. These warmed up a little bit just during class. I'm actually just going to use, I don't want to deflate them by trying to get them onto that spider or whatever. I did see some folks, I was doing a little late night Googling about donuts. Some people put them on like little squares of parchment and then actually just let the parchment go in and pulled it out, but 100 different ways to do the same thing is kind of awesome. One of the things that I love about baking is that you never stop learning. So yeah, as you can see, the shaped ones give us more of this, and then these are the this is the cut, the rolled out and cut. I can hear my mom saying, honey, they're all fine. But she's very encouraging. Any questions? Any more questions about the frying process here? I've got the fritters left and then some filling, and then we're going to wrap up for our morning.
Have you ever played around with the flavor of the dough, like adding spices or infusing the water?
I do like to add some spice, a little clove, a little nutmeg, maybe some cardamom. I want to try a little coriander, but the dough goes really well with some warm spices. Haven't tried anything savory, but I would like to try a savory donut for sure. Sounds really intriguing. With the citrus, sometimes I'll do like a thyme in the glaze, but yeah, I haven't done anything savory in the dough.
Here's a couple more. Could you possibly shape them, then roll them a little flatter for the filled ones?
You could. I was actually thinking about that last night. You could just kind of press it a little bit, but I just think it's the shape is so much nicer when you roll it for the filled ones. But I'm doing these in small batches, so if you've got a lot to contend with, then that might be something that you want to do so you don't have a lot of scrap. The oil just kind of cooled down here, so bleeding on these.
Does a thicker pot like a Lodge or a Staub hold the heat better or keep the temp more even?
Yes. So I'm using my Staub, and I think that's how I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And my mom's got a big Lodge cast iron pot that she uses for all her soups and stews, and so yes, you want to use something really thick. Cast iron, enamelware does great. And I prefer something with a straight side, just for the simple fact that it's easier to get the thermometer like clipped on and straight down into the oil. My mom's pot has like a slope side to it, so it's just a little wonky to get the thermometer on there. And at this point, I actually generally don't even use a thermometer. I kind of know. I'll use a donut hole to just test. If you can smell it and it's bubbly and you can see like it's swirling in there, and you're generally pretty good to go. These just need one more second.
With the spices, do you add the spices at the very beginning during the first mix? Yeah.
Yep. I add them in with the flours and the sugar and the salt. And I know you've got percentages here, and like I wouldn't go like 0.4% the weight of the flour is where I would start with and see if you like that. But yeah, that's one of the keys to the cinnamon. Besides a ton of almond flour in the cinnamon roll dough, it's like packed with really nice spices, and it's just great. Okay.
And there's a shout out. In Florida, I order my bread flour from Lindley Mills.
Nice, perfect.
Also a shout out from Asheville, where there's 3 inches of fluffy snow on the ground.
I'm jealous. I know it's gonna like sound ridiculous, but I'm not getting any winter. It doesn't feel right. But I am eating strawberries, so I can't complain. I'm gonna skip frying these fritters, just to show you how to glaze, and so we can wrap it up. There's not a ton of difference between frying the fritters. It's like a kid's book. And we've already got some fritters over here to show you.
What about something like sweet potato donuts?
Yes, and so I've been thinking about that, and then really just I've seen a potato flour donut, which I think would be incredible. So I like to use potato starch in cakes to make a cake flour, and also potato flour. They're a little different, but the next thing I want to do is try this with whole grains, at least some percentage of whole grain. And then I also want to do it with potato, and now I want to do it with sweet potato. But that sounds perfect to me. Yeah, like I said, blank canvas, so fun. Okay. They are best eaten same day, preferably once they're cool. So it doesn't, later in the day is fine. Actually, I don't like to eat them hot because I just don't feel like you get the true flavor coming through. But like within the hour, I think is what's optimal. So for having fun with your donuts, once you've made them, a couple of different things. So I made just a quick strawberry preserve. There's this great recipe that my friend Kia turned me on to called Strawberry Jewels. And I never know what to do with a strawberry because there's just so much water in there. They're delicious, right? So you just quickly poach them, like in a saucepan. You take the green off the top of the strawberry, quarter them, cut them in half. About 500 grams of strawberries in the saucepan. I think it's like 125 grams of granulated sugar, juice of a lemon, and you let it come to a low boil for 60 seconds. That's it. And then strain you take the strawberries out, strain them, let them cool. So you want them to still be red. You don't want to cook them till like they're white and mushy and they've turned into jam in the pot. Just literally, I think I've even done mine because these are so fresh at like 45 seconds in the pan. Pull them out, and then you've got like the perfect strawberry to like drop into a buttermilk pie or put into some buttercream. And then you can take for a second boil. Once it's cooled down a little bit, take that syrup juice that's left over and reboil it into a really nice like simple syrup. So we've got that around. And the first time I did it though, overcooked the strawberries. I thought it can't really be 60 seconds. It is. It's probably even less than 60 seconds. So I just ended up making this gorgeous jam. So no thickener. I just continued to let them go on the stovetop to get to the right consistency. So we've got fresh strawberry preserve, and I've got it in my bag here. And you want to have a nice open tip. And then we're going to cut an inroad, make a indentation into the donuts. You want to let them cool. Let's see if I can just get a little better placement for you guys. This is on wheels, and so everything has moved in the past hour. Now you can, make your art. So I go in the side and just poke. The nice thing about using a straw is you can kind of core it. So of course reusable straws are better. Just going into the center. They can really take a lot of filling. Another thing I've done with the citrus being in season, we did a key lime pie filling, which was really good. And then I'm gonna hold the donut. I'm just gonna squeeze until I feel it fill out. It can really take a lot, but you can't overfill them. So I do a nice big squeeze, and then pull the tip out, and then you've got this cute little jam. And then I let it sit, so then I'm actually going to just clean this up, because obviously gravity is not our friend here. So you can also, I keep a little box. So we will be delivering these to neighbors later. And then once you fill them, you can, I'll put them on the side to let some drip out, and then take a nice, it's just my kitchen towel, but take a nice damp paper towel and kind of clean it up. But you can also put them in a pastry. It's my dad's Powerade box, you guys. You can just put them like this and stack them this way. And that's gonna help the filling, gravity in your favor here, getting the filling to sink in.
Have you used apple butter as a filling?
I haven't. We have some in the pantry though, and that sounds really good. I bet my dad would love that. He's a big apple butter fan. All right, last one. You don't want to fill it so much that the donut's gonna split, but whatever, that's the joy of being the baker. You get to eat all that kind of stuff. So I'm just gonna stack these. And then for sort of the final thing I like to do with a filled donut in particular is give it a little stencil on the top. So I have this is just a file folder, or you use the top of a pie box, something kind of firm, with an X-Acto knife, and cut out some kind of pattern or shape. You could do letters and names, something special or memorable to you, whatever you'd like. And then I'll put, fill the donut, get this on the top, and then with some powdered sugar. If you've got a bakery and you've got a logo, this could potentially be cute. I like to dust it a little bit and then dust it over the top. And you want to do it once they're a little bit cool, otherwise the powdered sugar will just melt into the donut. You'll lose your design. Same if you want to do this with a cake, you can do it that way as well, but you'll lose it, and then you get something like this. So walking around all these suburban neighborhoods, I've been like, oh, I just want to pull the leaves down and put them over the donut and like do some sort of jungle stencil out here. There's all these beautiful palm fronds. So that's a filled donut. And then for, oh, you can also put something like rather cute on the belly button. What it makes me think of. So you've got your little bloop, and we've got tons of candied orange peel here. We keep the candied orange peel. We've got lime, lemon, grapefruit, and orange peel candied in the freezer, basically all times now. So we keep it, my mom and I is who I'm talking about, just between layers of parchment. So we've got gorgeous candied peel, which is like delicious. And then you can cut it into little wedges and just stick it into the top for something nice bite right there. All right. And for the glaze on the donuts, your day, your way. I'm just doing something really simple here. I've got a glaze that I made with a little bit of the orange simple syrup from the process of making the candied orange peel. So if you want to make the candied orange peel, I do have last week's class and just the recipe for the candied orange peel on my website. So if you just want the recipe to make the candied orange peel, it takes a couple days, but the labor intensive part just takes maybe like about an hour in your kitchen. Then you just have to wait for it. It's kind of just like the donuts. You could start the candied orange peel and your donut dough on the same day and then have everything ready. They just have to dehydrate. So if you have a dehydrator, it goes much faster. So here are the donuts. And this is the product. This is 3 batches worth of candied orange peel, the simple syrup that's left over from the candying process. And like we're putting it in everything that we're eating and drinking right now. So I've combined this with a little bit of milk and some powdered sugar, just whisked it together to get a nice glaze. And earlier this week, I made some graham crackers for my daughter, and we made just like a quick ganache. So just melted some chocolate with some heavy cream, whisked it together, dumped the donuts in the ganache, and then crumbled up some graham crackers on it. And that was really fun. So of course I was like, I need to make marshmallows and have a s'mores donut, but the beach is only 5 minutes away, which is great because it gets me out of the house. Otherwise, we have a small bakery. So I like it to be a little bit pourable. I don't like a frosting. So just the glaze and the ganache will harden. And I suppose you could even just brush the simple syrup on the top. Great. And then these, the candied peel is just great to have around because you can just, I don't know. I'm not a sprinkles person personally, as you may have guessed, but this just nice. Awesome. Okay, cool. So here's your donuts. Any questions? Donuts, dough, frying, sourdough. Otherwise, I think we are coming to the end of our morning together.
Yeah, there's no questions in the chat right this second. Maybe folks are thinking about last minute questions, but
sure, we'll give folks just a second. So after the class is done, shortly here, we will edit this and get it back to you. So you'll have a copy of this soon enough. And then I do hope if you enjoyed yourself this morning that you can join me for the cinnamon rolls. Super excited about those. We've got a couple different tests to do before the class, but those along with these have been some of my favorite things that I've made so far. But it's probably time to make some just good rustic sourdough bread so I don't lose my roots here. But
All right,
yeah,
we've got some questions pouring in.
great.
Watermelon glaze. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah.
Can you freeze the dough at any point in the process and continue later?
I have not frozen sourdough dough. I would encourage you to go through the whole process and then just freeze the donuts. If anyone else has frozen dough and then baked it, go for it. But I have not a commercial yeasted donut. You probably could, but just the sourdough is a little bit more delicate.
We got a few thank yous. This was enjoyable and informative.
Yay.
I'm using only stone ground flours. I'm assuming I'll need to up the liquids a certain percentage.
Yes. So I would add a little bit more water and a little bit more egg. I think the water will help you just develop like whatever gluten is there. And yeah, watch your proof times and everything. If you've got a lot of bran and germ in there, as I'm sure you know, things will just speed up because there's a little bit more food for the yeast and bacteria. But let me know how that goes.
How did you make the key lime filling?
The key lime filling, I just stole from the recipe from back in the day bakery. They're awesome. They're in Savannah. I love Savannah. And it's a sweetened condensed milk, 3 egg yolks, zest of a lime, and juice of a couple limes. And I just, rather than letting it cook in the pie filling, I just cooked it on the stove top till it was thick and then refrigerated it. And I kept it in the fridge for like 3 days and then piped it in the same way, and it was awesome, especially with a little bit of candied peel on the top, which was like perfect. And then you could do something interesting with different piping tips, like on the top of your donut, if you want like more of a frosted donut. But I just like the glaze.
Sourdough question. After BF on counter, I've been overnight fermenting like 8 hours. Is that not enough time? Should it be closer to 24 to proof properly?
Can you ask that one more time?
There's
after the 8-hour bulk fermentation, you're shaping them and then just proofing them on the counter. Yeah, I mean, I think that could work. I just like to handle the dough while it's cold, and then I like the flavor that happens after another cycle in the fridge. But that could definitely work. Yeah, sure. Yep.
Do you store the used oil in a specific way?
I have just been, because we have a couple different pots, I've honestly just been letting this cool and putting the lid on and then just storing it, obviously out of the way in the kitchen. But my favorite thing once it's cool is to also like put it in those deli containers. So you saw that my starter was in a deli container. They're not the most romantic. It's not a wet jar, but I'm always afraid of breaking stuff. And you can put anything in these, they're indestructible. So this is, rather than a ball jar or something, this is what I'll keep once the oil's cooled. It fills up about 2 of these, and it says 2/3 of the frying pan full of oil, but you could do less. You just don't want the donut to touch the bottom. And also I was thinking with the watermelon glaze, maybe some thyme would be good in that, maybe just something else in there. And then I know like people will pickle watermelon rinds, so I'm sorry, I'm just like, now I'm going to be thinking about that for days, but maybe you could do like a little watermelon rind pickle on the top or something. But right, they're like this gorgeous, they're perfect as is, and then you just the world is your oyster when it comes to flavoring after this. And I would just consider you know, the balancing of the sourdough interior with whatever you're gonna put on the top. So
And Julia says lemon with the watermelon, I think, would balance the sweetness.
there you go. There you go. Okay, well, I need to eat one of these, and I'm sure y'all have stuff to get to today. I'd love to see pictures of your donuts if you're making them, and I'd love to keep talking in conversation with you about your donut experience. So you can email me if you've got any questions. Let me know, and yeah, thank you all for joining me this morning. Thank you, Marley, for moderating, and I hope everybody has a great weekend out there. So thank you.